changed all of yours as well. And about 20 years ago, being a high schooler, going to Eretz Yisrael for the first time, so usually you feel like you've heard what the Torah is all about. It's okay, it's nice, it's sweet, but I never felt that there was much depth there until I started listening to Rabbi Tatz's shiurim. And it was almost as if I'd been looking at the surface of the water of the ocean, and then he took me down into a submarine. And I got to see how deep the Torah was, and how relevant it was, and how alive it was. And it certainly changed my life. And I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Rabbi Tatz. And since I became rabbi here, I've been trying to email Rabbi Tatz every few months, just to see if one day it would hit and he'd be in Florida. And Baruch Hashem, the Chemed conference brought him down. And it's a tremendous honor and privilege to get to hear from Rabbi Tatz, who's going to share a beautiful class on Divrei Torah with us.
No, Mama, can you ask him to turn down the volume a little bit? Okay, possible? Okay. Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you. Not going to hear me without this, right? Can you hear me at the back? Can you hear me at the back without this? Yes, no? Come sit closer. No? No? I need to use this mic? Better for you? Okay, so first of all, thank you very much to Rabbi Mama for this invitation to learn a little bit together. He told me that you are Miami's intellectual black belts. Is that right? So maybe let's talk about a subject, not directly Hanukkah, but of course it is relevant. And that's a very challenging subject, and that's the question of how does our free will interact with other people? A fascinating and amazing subject, actually, this week's parasha, as we'll try to illustrate. And you're welcome to ask questions. If I'm able, I'm happy to answer. But at the very least, you learn how to speak English correctly. So here's the question. The question is, can you ever really affect anyone else? When it comes to Hanukkah or anything that's in the ambit of Jewish history, when people affect us, right, the war in Gaza, war in Israel, or the Greeks trying to influence us and pressurize us to become assimilated. The question is really, how much do we look to Hashem in terms of what happens to us, and how much do we look to or even blame or hold people responsible? What's the interaction between what you receive in terms of what's due to you, what you deserve, and how much do you get that's the responsibility of other people? There's a difficult tension here. In other words, the question is what we call it's the problem between what we call bechira, that's free will, and hashgacha. Let me try to express the problem as clearly as I can. When someone does something to you, when you do something that affects yourself, we don't have a philosophical problem. If you do something dangerous and you get hurt, we understand that. You did something dangerous, you caused harm to yourself. But what happens when someone else tries to harm you? If you say that people can harm you with no limit, what happens to other hashgacha? What if you don't deserve that harm? Surely Hashem is protecting you. Surely you will get nothing that's not your due. That's what hashgacha means. On the other hand, people have free will to do things to other people. What happens when those two clash? Yeah, I don't see enough happy faces. Somebody's walking down the street, and you interview Hashem. Hashem, how do you feel about this person walking down the street? Hashem says, he's cool. You say, Hashem, are you going to kill him today? He says, no. He's got 25 more years to live. He's going to have a family. And while you're talking to Hashem, someone turns the corner and tries to kill him. You see the problem? Well, if the person could kill him, what's going to happen to his hashgacha? Hashem just told you that he's no reason why he should die today. And if you say, well, he couldn't kill him because Hashem's protecting him, what happens to the free will of the agent? Do we see the problem? Yes, no? That's a very serious challenge. Do we say that you can kill someone, I mean, that's an extreme example, even though Hashem was not going to take him out that day, which is a very scary extent to which human free will can operate? Or do we say you can never touch anyone unless he had it coming, which means that you can rest assured that the hashgacha that's guarding you will be intact, but that's very, very emasculating, or that pulls the teeth of human free will, means you never touch anyone. Most people resolve this problem by saying, well, you make your choice, you pull the trigger, but whether the bullet finds its mark or not is up to Hashem. But that really avoids the problem. That means that you're making your choices, but you never really affect anyone else. Right? If you really believe that you only get what's coming to you. And imagine you get into your car this evening, you pull out, and somebody backs into you and makes a big dent in your car. So you get out and start yelling and well, you wouldn't do that, of course. You, Miami, Young Israel, you'd get out and say, good evening. And then you say to this person, look what you did to my car. And the person looks at you and says, well, you're a religious Jew, aren't you? You say, yes. They say, well, you must believe you had it coming. I don't think we relate to the world that way. So this is the problem I'd like to discuss this evening. And the question again is, do you ever affect anyone else? And it's a classic area of Jewish thought. And I think most of the Jewish religious world probably misunderstands the subject. And I'd like to share with you what I learned from Rav Moshe Shapira, which is a very, perhaps a radical approach to this, but I think it's the correct way to approach the subject. Is that okay? Can we do that?
Yes.
Let me set the scene by describing to you a very amazing incident that occurred during the life of the Pischei Tshuva. If you'd like to look this up, it's in Choshen Mishpat, in Yud Ches. He documents in a question he was asked, which is an amazing question. Pay close attention, because the details are important. In his generation, he was one of the great Torah thinkers of his generation, one of the great halachic masters. There was an individual who was a very learned Talmid Chacham. I don't know exactly who it was. He was visiting a commercial fair in Europe. I think it was in Leipzig. And in that place, people had a custom that when there were financial disputes, they would make a Beis Din. So they would co-opt 3 people to be on the Beis Din, and even the non-Jews there used to subject themselves to the same arbitration. And he says what happened to him was as follows. There was some dispute between 2 Jews about money, and so they convened a Beis Din. Each of them chose a dayan, somebody from the community who would be one of the judges on the Beit Din. And since he was a visiting, very learned Talmid Chacham, they couldn't very well refuse to put him on. So they asked him to be a member of the Beit Din. And he says the following thing happened. He was sitting here with the other 2 judges, and they began to hear the evidence about this financial case. And he says it became immediately apparent to him that the other 2 judges were lying. They were colluding dishonestly against the innocent party. They were going to vote clearly in a completely illegitimate fashion. Money would change hands in the wrong direction, and he would be party to a miscarriage of justice. Why? Because in Jewish law, in halakha, you are having a vote of 3, right? We never have an even number on a Beit Din, right? I've never figured out why an American jury has 12 people. We never do that. We always have an odd number, so there can never be a hung decision. And they vote. And in fact, the law, if you go into these laws, you see that when a Beis Din makes a judgment, the minority opinion is not even allowed to disclose that it had that opinion, right? If you 3 are sitting on a Beit Din, right, and you're judging my case, and you disagree with those 2, so you're not even allowed to tell me afterwards that you disagreed, right? The majority is as if there was unanimous decision. And the reason is because when a Beis Din makes a decision, it comes down as a judgment of the Beis Din, and the minority melts away. Not like in American law, where there's a learned dissenting opinion, right? We don't do that. In other words, he would vote, the other 2 would outvote him, and a miscarriage of justice would take place. So he thought to himself, what can I do? And he came up with a solution. The solution is, I could say, I don't know. Because if you say you don't know, you recuse yourself from judgment. Then the Beis Din's left with only 2 judges. That's not valid. And so the case is closed. Or you reconvene a new Beis Din. There's a way to handle it. But at least you would not be guilty of being part of that illicit judgment. But then he thought to himself, 1 second, if I say I don't know, I'd have to lie. Because he did know. You see the problem? So he said his question was, what does Torah want from me? What does Hashem want from me? Does he want me to say the truth and have a lie result? Or do he want me to say a lie to have the truth result? Isn't that an interesting question? You studied that at law school? That's an amazing question. On the one hand, I can say I don't know, which is false, and have a better result, an outcome. Or I could say a vote, which is the truth, be outvoted and have a lie result from my vote. What's called the truth? Now, halachically, it's very interesting. The truth is always situational. Right? We always, you're sitting at home and the phone rings. Your wife picks it up. And from to her tone of voice, you see this is someone you don't want to speak to. So this is what you do. Not home. And your wife says, I'm sorry, he's out. Is that truth or falsehood? What would you say? Is that a true or a lie? What would you say? That's a lie. Because the meaning of the question is not which side of the doorstep is your husband standing on. That's not the meaning of the question. You can't get away with that legalistic solution. You have to take it in context. So what's the context here? What should I say? So he thought possibly he could resolve this question from a Rambam who rules on a case in the Gemara. And here's the case. What happens if the Sanhedrin, right, the great judicial body of the Jewish people, 71 judges, or whatever it is, they're sitting in judgment, and they are judging, let's say, a capital case. Okay? So this person's on trial for his life, and you are all members of the Sanhedrin. I'm sure you're all duly qualified. I'm sure you could be Dayanim in the Sanhedrin. And now you're judging a capital case. This person's on trial for his life. Now, you know that in Jewish law, in halacha, when it comes to a capital case, we have extreme requirements that you don't find in any secular system. You need more than a majority to convict. You need a cross-examination of the witnesses, which is almost impossibly severe. Right? There are many unusual quirks to ensure that there's no illicit conviction. Right? And one of the quirks is, listen carefully, that if there's a significant majority to convict the person, is convicted. But if all the judges say guilty, then he's acquitted. If there's total unanimous agreement that he's guilty, he is freed. Does that make sense? The reason here, I mean, this is not our discussion directly, the reason is that if, first of all Jews agreeing is definitely abnormal. Okay, that's definitely not right. But the reason is that we require that somebody speaks in his defense. We're concerned that if no one defended him, possibly they didn't examine the case well enough. Right? By the way, there's a wonderful movie about this. Yeah, you should show this on your TV before you kick out the screen and use it to keep your Gemaras in. But this was made many, many years ago, and you should read the screenplay. It's a wonderful play called 12 Angry Men. 100% kosher movie. There's not a woman in the whole movie. But this is a courtroom drama about a young man being convicted or accused of killing his father. And everyone saw it clearly. It's an open and shut case, and the evidence is heard. And the whole drama takes place in a jury room where the 12 men, as it happens on the jury, debate the case. 11 of them walk in and vote to convict him immediately because it's absolutely clear. And one fellow has room for doubt. And as the drama unfolds, he shows why they may indeed be rude. It's a wonderful, if you teach this subject, you teach young people, it's a wonderful script to read, to challenge them to think about, these things. So here's the rule, that if all the judges say that he's guilty, the person is acquitted. Are we clear about that? Okay, watch what happens. This person's on trial for his life, and you are all members of the Sanhedrin, okay? Do you mind being the most junior? You know, we vote from junior to senior. Why do we vote from junior to senior? What's the reason? We don't want a junior to be influenced by a prior senior vote. So we start with a junior, and we move through to the all-time 10th Dan black belt, great leader of the generation, who's called the Mufla Sheba Sanhedrin. He casts the final vote. Now picture the scene. Evidence has been heard, and the vote begins. Guilty, guilty, death, convict him, death. And every single member votes guilty until the final Dayan has to speak. And he knows that the accused is guilty. But if he says guilty, he'll be acquitted. Because if he says guilty, you'll have a unanimous verdict that he's guilty, and they'll be acquitted. So the final Dayan's problem is, should he lie to have the truth result? You hear the question? Should he say the truth, which is guilty, and have the guilty man acquitted? Or should he say innocent to make sure that there'll be a conviction? You hear the question? What do you think he should do?
Say he's innocent.
Say what?
He should say he's innocent.
Anyone else? So the halacha is, lefim ma she'ena rois. The judge has to say what he sees. He says guilty, the man's acquitted, that's Hashem's problem. So he thought to himself, I know what to do. I'm sitting on this Beis Din, there are two liars with me. I must say the truth. Says the Pischei Tshuva, wrong. Your case of 3 people is not like this case of the Sanhedrin. And what I'd like to discuss a little bit is the background as to why that is the case. But in order to get there, let's take a little tour through the area of whether one person's free will affects anyone else. And we'll see how it relates to this very interesting case. Look it up yourself in the Piskei Tshuva. Maybe your community would enjoy learning it through. He brings the whole case and the debate. It's very interesting. But here's the question. Can you ever affect anyone else? So please stay with me carefully. There are two ways to resolve this issue. One is that if Hashem has decided, or let's take the classic case. A person's walking down the street and Hashem has issued no decree of death upon that person. That's the unique, what is called a Gzeru min Hashamayim. It needs full explanation. But Hashem operates in such a way that he makes what we call decrees in Shamayim. It's called a Gezerah. And then it's operated, it's activated in the world. What happens when a person's walking down the road with no decree in Shamayim? I'm not talking about a person that Hashem has decreed that he will die today. You cannot escape that. But somebody that Hashem has not issued a decree. And at that point, someone tries to kill him, which means he does not deserve to die. There was no decree against him. Could he be killed or not? There are two ways to resolve the issue. Both of them very problematic. One is that there's no way you could touch him. There's no way you could kill somebody that wasn't designated to die. So you'll pull the trigger and he'll sneeze, or the bullet will miss, or the gun will jam. There's no way you could kill someone who doesn't deserve to die. Or, put it this way, if you kill him, it's a sign that he was going to die anyway. Because you certainly could not kill somebody who's not designated or deserved to die. I mean, what happened to Hashgacha? Hashem's providence is certainly watching over that person. And therefore, the only possible interpretation of somebody killing someone else is he was going to die then anyway. Maybe not by a gunshot. Maybe he would have had a heart attack. Maybe a brick would have fallen off a building. Maybe his wife would have woken up more violent than usual that morning. But he would have died at that moment anyway. And the consequence is that the murderer can say to the family, what do you want from me? Your father was going to die today anyway. He's guilty, to be sure. He'll be tried for murder. No question about it. But he never produced the result. Is this clear? On the one hand, that's a very satisfying feeling that nothing ever happens to you that wasn't meant to happen. But you're pulling the teeth of the power of free will. That means you never affected him. Well, you affected him, you killed him, but he was going to die anyway. You see the problem. The other opinion is that you could actually kill someone who was not going to die. Human free will is so powerful, you could actually do something to somebody that would not have happened. That is very scary. That is very problematic in terms of Hashgacha. It means, well, Hashem isn't watching over me. But it's very empowering in terms of your free will. Most of the religious world probably takes the first view, that whatever happens was meant to happen anyway. You pulled the trigger, you're guilty, but it was going to happen anyway. And I think that's wrong. I think the correct approach is that you could actually put someone in a circumstance where they may be harmed that would not have happened otherwise, and you are 100% responsible. Let me try to explain. First, let me give you some sources and try to prove this to you. In fact, as far as I'm aware, every single source we have says the same thing. I don't know any source at all, not one, that says the opposite. I'm not talking about very recent writing. In very recent Jewish writing, there's a lot of support for the other side. But if you look at our classics, you won't see any. If you'd like to look this up, I wrote a book about this. This is called Will, Freedom, and Destiny, with all the sources. And if you want to research the background, I published that book in Hebrew, printing out all the sources in full. In other words, you can actually learn them. You can learn them in the book. Maybe if you can email me, Rabbi, I could send you the text and people can go through it. But since it's a difficult book to understand, I suggest you buy 2 copies. Then you'll understand it very well. But let me tell you 1 or 2 sources. First, I'll tell you a very beautiful and classic source that I heard personally from Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg in Baltimore. And here's a very brief and succinct proof, and then I'll give you a couple more elaborate ones. Every day we say in Tachanuin, Vayomer David el Gad. David said to the prophet God, Niplana b'yad Hashem. Let us fall into Hashem's hand, ki rabim rachamav, because he's very merciful. Uvayad Adam al epola. Let me not fall into human hand. Well, that's very telling. Here's what happened. Hashem said to David, you and your people need suffering. I give you a choice. What type of suffering do you want? Do you want an epidemic? Do you want a famine, or do you want a war? Fascinating that Hashem gave him an option of which sorts of suffering that he wanted. And David chose an epidemic. And the reason is because Niplana b'yad Hashem. Let's fall into Hashem's hand. Let's not fall into war, which is human hand. Now, what difference does it make? If every bullet has your name on, if you're only going to get what you deserve, what's the difference? Flip a coin. You see, David chose disease. Why he chose not a famine is another, it's not our subject. Directly tonight, some of Porshim say the reason he did not choose a famine was because people would accuse him of being unfair. As the king, he would always have food. The people would be hungry and he would have food. So he didn't want that accusation against himself. So he narrowed the choice down to a war or a disease epidemic. War comes from human hand. Epidemic comes from Hashem. So David said, let me choose the epidemic because I'm dealing with you, Hashem. Dealing with a Philistine soldier, there's no trusting what human beings could do. Niplana b'yad Hashem. Let's fall into Hashem's hand. Ki rabim rachamav. He's very kind. He's merciful. He'll only give me what I deserve. But an enemy soldier could give me more than I deserve. Clearly, you see from this proof that humans could hurt you more than Hashem would hurt you. Hashem was only decreed a certain amount of suffering on you, but a human could hurt you more. If that's not true, why would you choose the epidemic? Did we see the proof? Any objections to this? You don't have to agree with me, right? That is the beautiful and succinct proof that we bring from that statement of David. By the way, this is not only philosophic, it's halachic as well. Some poskim rule, I think you'll find this in the Tziv, he says that this has practical output. If you're in a dangerous situation in a country that's threatening your life and you have to escape, and you have two escape routes, one through a war zone and one through an epidemic zone, go through the epidemic. All else being equal. You have to deal with disease that might kill you, or a war zone, go through the disease, because disease comes from Hashem. But wars are human beings, and there's no trusting human beings. Or, put it another way, people are dangerous, in case you haven't noticed. People are dangerous. Hashem's not dangerous, only does to you what you deserve. But people could do more than you deserve. Beautiful proof, no? Yes, no?
There could be another motivation that it's just better to receive your punishment directly from Hashem.
But that's not what he said. Ki rabim rachamav, because he's very kind and merciful, implying that the Philistines are not merciful. So he gives you the reason.
But it's direct versus indirect.
But that's not what he says.
Right.
He says, let us fall into Hashem's hand because his mercy is great. He tells you the reason, whereas Philistine might not be merciful. That's what he's saying. I'm sure there's other reasons as well. That's exactly 100%. That's what I'm saying. 100%.
It is not only from Hashem.
100%. Exactly. That's my.
Is this also a proof that collective punishment overrides individual merit?
That's a wonderful question, but it's not our direct subject. You'll have to invite me again. That's a fascinating question. Is there such a thing as a collective responsibility? Is there collective free will and collective tshuva? That's an amazing subject. If there's time, we can talk about it. It's not going to take us off track.
What about masks?
What about? It's going to be a long night. Yes, that could make a difference. I'll come to that in a moment. Okay, let me tell you the classic proof which you read in this week's Sedra. Okay, by far the most classic expression of this, and you find this in a famous Orach Chaim, but actually the Zohar says the same thing, the Alshik says the same, the Malbim says the same thing, the Netziv says the same thing, but the classic source is the Orach Chaim. And listen to what he says. Read it up. It's coming this week. The brothers saw Yosef. You remember the story. The brothers see Yosef approaching, and they decide to kill him. We're not going to go into the whole background, how the brothers could pass judgment on a brother, how they could make a based in on their brother, but they decided he needed to be killed. They felt that he was a Radev, threatening their future, the future of the Jewish people, and therefore the future of the world. They decided to kill him. So they said, behold, this dreamer of dreams approaches. Let's kill him. Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dreams. Says the Orach Chaim, they weren't being childishly sarcastic. What they meant was, we reason, we judge that Yosef needs to be killed because he's a liar. He told us that he had dreams of his superiority, but we know that he's lying. He claims to be a prophet with prophetic dreams. We think he's lying. So we're going to kill him because he's a threat to us. But one moment, can we be sure that we're right? After all, we're human, we're vulnerable. Yes, we can be sure. You know why? Yosef's born here. At age 17, he has dreams that somewhere in the future we'll bow down to him. And we say those dreams are false. No problem, kill him now, and there ain't going to be a future in which we'll bow down to him, because he's dead. Therefore, not only will justice be done, it will immediately be seen to be done. Is this clear? At this point in his life, he predicts that some point in the future we'll bow down to him. Well, we can close that option, we can kill him. then we'll see that his dreams are false, because there'll never be a time we bow down, because he's dead. So we'll demonstrate that we're correct. So we'll kill him. So Reuben stepped forward and he said, my brothers, you're making a terrible mistake. Free will is so powerful that you could kill him. Hashem created the world for free will. He's not going to stand in your way. He's going to let you kill him. You will falsely conclude that you were correct. Meantime, he had prophetic dreams. Hashem will work out the dreams in some other way. That's up to his big computer in the sky. He's going to figure out what to do with that. But it's possible that he had prophetic dreams and you changed that. Because human free will is so powerful, you could kill him and you'll wrongly conclude that you were right. So the brother said, what should we do? Reuben said, don't touch him. Throw him into this pit of snakes and scorpions. Now, snakes and scorpions, like they're going to kill him? No human hand. No self-respecting scorpion is going to touch you unless he has a decree from Hashem, because scorpions got no free will. The Maharal says, by the way, the pit was not full of snakes and scorpions, because if you throw a person onto a pile of snakes and scorpions, that's called murder. You hold someone's head underwater and say, I didn't kill him, it was just a lack of oxygen. That's murder. But the Maharal says, but there were enough snakes and scorpions in the pit that it was dangerous. Not guaranteed death, but very dangerous. What was the logic? The logic was, if you raise your hand against him, all bets are off. Because human free will is so powerful, you could kill him. But if you put him into a pit of snakes and scorpions, no snake or scorpion will touch him because they got no free will. They can only do what Hashem decrees. And therefore, by the way, the Medrash says they first set their dogs on him, because dogs have got no free will. And when the dogs didn't kill him, they decided to throw him into a pit. Is this clear? And as always in Torah, it's exactly in the words. What does the pasuk say? Vayatzilehu miyadam. Reuben saved Yosef from their hand. Says the Or HaChaim, miyad habechiri, from the hand of human free will. He didn't save him from his fate. That was his intention. Whatever happens to him happens. It's Hashem's problem. Hashem's dealing with him. But don't touch him. Don't raise a human hand against him. Because a human hand has free will, and that could kill someone that was not designated to be killed. Vayatzilehu miyadam. He saved him from their hand. You see the proof? Very elegant proof. And I don't really see any other way to learn this. Right? And all our commentaries say the same thing. In other words, don't touch him with your human hand. Put him to a situation where the direct cause of death, what the lawyers call the proximate cause of death, will be a non-human agent. That will tell whether Hashem wants him dead or not. But you kill him, there's no bet, all bets are off on that. You could kill him even though Hashem had not issued a decree. And the language of the Or HaChaim is, it's possible to kill somebody, shelon nigzar alav misa b'dei shemayim. You could kill somebody that was not decreed to die. He doesn't say you could kill someone who is decreed to live. And he doesn't say you could save someone that Hashem decreed to die. But what he says is someone with no decree, you could kill. Is this clear? Yeah.
How is someone decreed to live different than someone who's not?
Because when Hashem decides to do something, you cannot compete with him. So Hashem wants somebody dead, there's nothing you can do to save him. And if somebody wants somebody to live, there's nothing you can do to kill him. But what we're saying is, in the open situation where Hashem has not issued a decree, and then you put him in danger, Hashem says, whoa, let's see if he deserves to be saved. In the language of the Zohar, when somebody tries to kill you, it needs more of a miracle to save you than when a non-human agent threatens you. And here's what we're saying. You can put someone in a situation of danger. That you can do. Whether he dies or not, Hashem has to decide. We're not saying anything happens without Hashem's involvement. He always has to make a decision. He always has to give permission. But the question is, when you invoke a situation of danger, Hashem's going to say, 1 second, do you deserve to be saved? Do you have enough merit to be saved? This, by the way, is why you shouldn't put yourself in danger. Because when you put yourself in a situation of danger, Hashem stops and he opens the books and he says, do you deserve to be saved? What the Or HaChaim is saying is you could put someone in a situation of danger in which Hashem will make a decision. And if he doesn't deserve to be saved, Hashem's going to let free will run its course. Okay, that's the classic source. But let me tell you, there are many, many sources for this. I'll share with just one or two. Once you see these, they are so clear. Let me share with you one or two others. Here's one classic one. There's a famous question that the Rambam asks and the Ramban about. If it's relevant to what I'm saying.
Yeah, which is that it does not say in the pasuk that there were snakes and scorpions. It's a drasha of
Okay.
one Madam in the Gemara,
Okay.
who's an unusual Madam that only says two things in the whole Shirah.
Yeah.
And so that very often indicates it may not possible.
But the pasuk says Vayatzilehu miyadam.
No, I get that. That's the drasha.
Yeah.
But the Gemara is a drasha of
Yeah.
Abraham by Mayim,
Yeah.
on the pasuk of Krav
Yeah.
Yeshua, Tamko,
Okay.
Shema Madam has two
But it's a Torah
The
Shabbat.
Rambam says in general, when you have a thing with a real mandam,
Yeah.
maybe you don't pass like that.
Are you arguing that there was no danger in the pit and this whole proof falls away?
Yeah, it could very well be, because
I'm telling you what the Orach Chaim, the Alshik,
it's contrary to the Saturday, it's Arabic, it's-
but all our Achronim say this. So that's all I'm sharing with you.
I just want to give the perspective.
Moving on. So here's a famous question. The Rambam and Ramban ask, why were the Egyptians punished for what they did to the Jewish people? After all, it was predicted. Now here we have a problem. In the 5th parak of Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam deals with the problem of Yediyah and Bechira. If Hashem knows in advance what's going to be, how can people have free will? Now, that's a well-known question. In the 6th parak, the Rambam asks a subtly different question. If Hashem knows in advance what's going to be, how do you have free will to do any different? You don't. But in 6th parak, he says, what happens when Hashem announces in advance what will be? He issues a prophecy. He tells human beings what will be in the future. There's no room to move. Is this clear? If Hashem knows in advance what's going to happen, theoretically you have no free will. That's a well-known challenge. But in the 6th parak, the Rambam says, what happens when Hashem gives a prophecy? He tells Avram Avinu openly that the Jews will be enslaved in a foreign land. Well, then the Egyptians clearly have no choice, it would seem. Not only does Hashem know it in advance, He decreed it in advance. He announced that it would happen. The Egyptians should be able to say, Hashem, reward us. We did what you decreed. You hear the question? There are many answers to this question, but listen to the Ramban. Ramban says, the Egyptians were not punished for doing what Hashem decreed. Indeed, they were fulfilling a divine mandate. They were punished because they hurt the Jews more than they needed to. And it's based on a pasuk, Ani chashavti, as Hashem says, I calculated a certain amount of harm, and they did more. Which means, and then there's other answers as well, the Egyptians were also punished for the minimum they did because their intention was wrong. They weren't intending to fulfill a decree, they were malicious. This is and the Rambam answers another question. The Rambam says there was no decree on any individual Egyptian. Who said you had to do it? Mahmoud or Ishmael or whatever your name is, right? Leave it to someone else. There's a range of answers. But one answer is the Egyptians were punished indeed, not for what they did. Because what they did was decreed and therefore, but they were punished for doing more. Oh, you see, you could hurt somebody more than is decreed. Right, you see it? I'll give you one more. The Netziv says, he gives a whole range of proofs, and now's not the time to go into all of them, but here's one beautiful one. When Daniel was an advisor in the Persian court, right, around the time, just after the time of Purim, when the Daniel was an advisor in the Persian court, as often happens, the Jew was a Jewish courtier and advisor to the king, there were non-Jewish courtesans who were jealous of him, and they told the king that he's a traitor. So the Persian king said, well, I don't think so. I think he's a holy man, like his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In fact, in a certain sense, he worshipped him. And here's what I'm going to do. I will prove that you're wrong. I will put him in a pit of hungry lions, Daniel in the lion's den. I'll put him into a den of hungry lions, and watch what happens. I claim that he's holy enough that he'll be protected miraculously. I'm going to starve the lions, and when they're hungry enough, I'll put Daniel in the lion's den, and I claim that he's holy enough to be protected by the lions. If I'm wrong, and he's a traitor and not a holy man, the lions will devour him. That was the test, and as you all know, he survived in the... But listen to this. The next pasuk says that the king threw him into the den of lions and sealed the mouth of the lion's den with a big stone because he was concerned that the jealous courtiers might kill him and then say that the lions killed him. Oh, he's not concerned about hungry lions, but human beings he has to protect him against. In other words, and here we're not talking about normal danger. Here we're talking about miraculous salvation. That means he needs to be protected from hungry lions. The king was confident that he had enough merit to protect himself, to be protected miraculously. But even then, human beings cannot be trusted. Beautiful, no? So you see that he felt it necessary to protect Daniel, and then it brings this out beautifully. He felt it was necessary to protect Daniel from humans, because humans could harm you even if you're on a level of being miraculous. And the Zohar says it clearly. The Zohar says not every day does a person have enough merits to be protected miraculously. You need more schus, he says, more merit to deserve the miracle of being protected from human beings. And there are many other sources as well, but this I think is the correct direction. There are sources, Cheves Salvavis and various others, that say that a person is never harmed without Hashem being involved. But it's not a contradiction. All it means is that even when a person puts another person in a situation of danger, Hashem then has to make a decision about whether they indeed will be killed or not. But here's the operative principle. You can put someone in a situation of danger in which a decision needs to be made whether they'll be protected or not. And they may not be protected, which means they'll die, which means you caused it. Right? That is, by the way, this probably works on the positive side too. On the positive side, can you ever really help anyone? You make a real effort and you give some tzedakah that's very meaningful to them. Maybe you should say they had it coming. You get the mitzvah, no one's arguing about that. But you never really help them because they had it coming. You know, you're a loving husband. Every night when you're exhausted, you drag yourself into the kitchen, you make your wife a delicious cup of, herbal tea exactly like she likes. And you take pride in the fact that well, maybe she had it coming. Maybe if you hadn't done it, someone else would have, she's going to get what's coming to her. Or can you take credit for what you actually do in the world? According to this line of thinking, you could benefit someone in a way that might not have happened otherwise. You don't only act in the world, you affect other people genuinely. Now, let's take one more step. We are not saying that you could do anything to anyone under all circumstances. That we're not saying. There are very serious limits. And let me mention a few of them. By far the most important is you can only affect someone else to the extent that they lack schus. Right? In other words, when the brothers wanted to harm Yosef, the only question is, could you harm him in terms of the fact that he's not protected enough? Let's put it this way. If someone has enough merit, enough schus, you cannot touch them no matter what you do. The classic example of that is what we call tzaddik gamor. Tzaddik gamor means a person who is invulnerable. They have enough merit that you cannot touch them at all. Which means if somebody kills such a person, they definitely had it coming. The classic example in history is Mordechai. Mordechai knew that Haman could not touch him for a whole set of historical reasons, the Shevet that he came from, Binyamin, but he knew that he was invulnerable to Haman. And therefore he chose the policy of standing where Haman would walk past and drive him into a total anti-Semitic frenzy, getting him to self-destruct. But that's a very dangerous game. A very dangerous game. The Pasuk says, Eretz nitna beyad rasha. The world is given into the hand of the wicked, in case you hadn't noticed. The world's not been run by benevolent, politicians who care about you. I hate to tell you this, even here in the United States. They'll kill you for less than a vote, no question. And therefore, Eretz nitna beyad rasha. The world is given into the hands of the wicked. The solution is diplomacy, strategy. We don't face them in a full frontal battle. The shoe's on their foot in this generation. And therefore, what drove Mordechai to think that he could stand in front of Haman, who had all the cards in his hand? The answer was he knew he couldn't be touched, which means that anything that happened to him was only from Hashem. That's called tzaddik gamor. But what if you lack schus? What if you're vulnerable? The fear was that Yosef had done something in his life that made him vulnerable to human free will. And then there's an opening for human free will to affect you. That's the concern. And it goes according to the level of your schus. As Rav Moshe Shapiro used to say, it's a battle between the power of the Baal Bechira, the person wielding the free will. No accident, the Torah teaches this by the Shvatim, the great, cosmically great progenitors of the Jewish tribes. Real Baal Bechira does not apply to a 14-year-old Arab that they send onto a bus with a bomb on his back. First of all, the Netziv says, the Al-Sheikh also, the Netziv says, this consideration applies only when an individual is targeted, not when a whole mass of people are targeted. This ability of a Baal Bechira to affect someone is only when he targets a specific individual, but he has to be a Baal Bechira. And the recipient, the victim, has to be somebody who lacks schus. And there's a battle between those two. By the way, it doesn't have to be your schus. It could be someone else's. Mr. A is walking down the street and B tries to kill him. But Mr. A has a wife. Maybe she's a great tzaddikus and she doesn't deserve to lose her husband. That's good enough. This is the reason why some people don't take out insurance. Now, it's very important to take out insurance. My son sells it. You should buy it from him. But the reason some people don't take out insurance is because the logic is if you're walking down the street and you've got no insurance policy and someone tries to kill you, maybe your wife needs you. After all, you're the person who brings home the bacon or whatever you bring home. She needs you to support the family. You might not deserve to be saved, but maybe she does. But if you're walking down the street, you've got a $100 million life insurance policy and someone tries to kill you, your wife's okay. Some husbands I know, she's probably better off. This is the logic why you should make yourself indispensable to so many people. You should single-handedly support so many poor families that when someone tries to take you out, Hashem's going to say, you know what, it's just too complicated. I'll put up with you in the world a bit longer. It's not the highest motivation for tzedakah, but it's kosher, you know. And that's the logic. In other words, it may not be your merit, but it may be consequential. There may be somebody else who doesn't deserve that you should die. So that's the first and most important consideration. When we say that you could affect someone else, we mean to the extent that you lack zchus. The second is that it does not apply to some unique circumstances. For example, war. Milchama Sani Asisi. Wars have a special hashgacha that this does not apply to. Perhaps the most famous exception is when a mass destruction takes place, like a Holocaust type or a mass destruction. The Gemara says, Kevan shenitten reshus lemashchis la'ashchis. When Hashem gives permission to the destroyer to destroy, shuv enui mavchin bein tzadik l'rasha. He no longer discerns between the righteous and the wicked. Amazing principle. So when there's a massive destruction, it mows down, and sometimes the righteous go first. But that needs discussion as well. Another exception is people of major power, like a king or a prince. Leiv melech b'yad Hashem, the pasuk says in Mishlei, the first parak in Mishlei. That means that the hearts of kings and princes and prime ministers and mayors of major cities is in the hand of Hashem. Amazing principle. The irony in Western society is that when a man's elected president, he thinks he has lots of power. In Jewish thinking, he just became a totally transparent puppet. Of course, he's responsible for his decisions, but whether the consequences will play out upon the population depends on what they deserve. And therefore, leiv melech b'yad Hashem. So there are many exceptions that limit a person's ability to affect anyone else. But the principle remains that in certain circumstances, to the extent that you have free will and to the extent that they lack protective merit, to that extent you could put someone in danger that wouldn't have happened otherwise, in which situation Hashem will have to make a decision, and then it may play itself out. So far, so good? Any questions before we close the circle and come back to our original case?
Is an Arab terrorist considered a person or like a dog?
No.
But the Arab terrorists have people.
If what you mean is, if a miseducated Arab child who's raised to think that what he's doing is heroic and spiritual is irresponsible, he may not be. Maybe his teachers are, or someone in the chain of command who educated that child that way. We don't know that. Right? It's theoretically possible that a person, he's been raised in an intensely religious environment, their level of emunah is off the charts, ready to die at a moment's notice. Right? Rav Moshe used to say, Halavai Aleinu. That we had I'm talking about emunah, I'm not talking about what they got up here, which is scrambled eggs. I'm talking about power of emunah. Right? And therefore it's theoretically possible, can't make that judgment. Yes?
Is the schus that you earn by good deeds the same as the schus that you earn from suffering?
We can't measure those things. Can't measure those things. First of all, it has to be suffering taken for the right reason. Suffering that you accept as a correction. And secondly, it's not referring to suffering that you did to yourself. If you smoke or you do silly stuff, that you can't blame Hashem for that. That's a complicated. We don't have the mechanism of weighing those things up.
If person thinks he has a sufficient force to put himself in danger and do something, and that time he will be under God's court.
Indeed, indeed.
He will measure again.
100%. That's why you...
Maybe not sufficient.
Indeed, 100%, yeah, correct. Okay, can we come back to our...
But how Mordechai can...
Because Mordechai, he had das Torah, he was on the border of prophetic knowledge, and he knew that the only way to destroy Haman is to get him to self-destruct, and he was correct. Didn't look that way to the people at the time. That's what Torah judgment is. Let's just speak about a moment this relative to Hanukkah. The greatness of Hanukkah is that it represents a transition from a previous generation of prophetic insight to a generation of human wisdom. Now let's spend a moment on this. You know that history occupies two phases. There's the phase of what we call Gilu, where Hashem reveals himself, from the creation until about 2,350 years ago, when Hashem revealed himself in prophecy and miracles. They always go together, by the way. No miracle ever occurred without the presence of a prophet. The Ralbag says that. Hashem reveals himself openly in the world through speech called prophecy and action called miracles. And then Purim came on the scene, and that's when the light began to fade. Purim was the beginning of the end of miracles and prophecy, And 150 years later, at Hanukkah, it ended completely. That's the transition zone. What is Purim? Purim is a miracle, but it's a hidden miracle. The king married a girl, didn't know she was Jewish, a whole bunch of political stuff. There was no dead people being revived, manna falling from heaven, ocean splitting. The Megillah doesn't mention Hashem's name. Megillah, by the way, means to roll up, and Megaleh means to reveal. Esther means the hidden one. Purim means the luck of the draw. The whole point of Purim is that the light's fading. The Gemara has a debate whether it's prophetic or not, borderline. And 150 years later, there's nothing, no prophets, no miracles, and nothing. The only exception is after the war was won, candles burned for 8 days. Symbolic goodbye from the world of miracles. No prophets. It was after the war was won. It had nothing to do with saving the Jewish people. Only the Kohanim saw it in the Mikdash. And since then, we've seen nothing. The residue of that miracle is a light that burns in your window every winter, which is an assertion of the light we once saw. The Rambam says that life is like standing on a dark plain on a stormy night. You stand there beaten by the rain and lashed by the wind and hopelessly lost. And in the midst of the darkness and your despair, suddenly there's a flash of lightning, and by that you see the road clearer than by day. And as you see it, the light disappears. And the rest of the night you walk through the storm on memory alone of a flash that you once saw. So the Jewish people, now we have tremendous flashes of clarity, 2,000 years ago and more. And now we're walking through the long desert of history's night. That's our journey. It's trudging through that genocidal desert, clutching that Sefer Torah to a cosmic destination. But that's when the transition took place. Purim, the light began to fade, and Hanukkah is when it ended. And Hanukkah is the time, Rav Hutner calls it the festival of the oral law, because that's when rabbinic genius and rabbinic wisdom and human creativity came to the fore. You know, I just put it this way. What was the first rabbinic decision ever made? The first rabbi who ever made a decision was Matityahu. Until then, there was Urim V'Tumim, there were Nevi'im. You asked Hashem. So one day he gets up and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I've made a decision. Rabbi, what's your decision? We declare war on the Greek Empire. Rabbi, you and whose army? There's me and my sons. There's 5 of us. We've got a few friends, about 13 of us. I think we can do it. Rabbi, did you ask the prophets? None of them. Did you check with Urim and Tumim? Haven't seen those for a long time. Rabbi, what makes you think this is the right decision? I think this is the right decision. And they won. That was the beginning of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So we're deep in the darkness of the confusion and talk about one person's free will affecting another. This is genuine. This is real, very real. To the level we lack schus, that we are vulnerable. Let's just close the circle and come back to our court case. So, when the Sanhedrin is making a judgment, and the last judge has to speak, the last Dayan has to speak, the reason that he needs to say the truth is because Elokim nitzav ba'adas hadayanim, right? Actually, it's the Chinuch says this. You know, there's a very, can I speak another couple of minutes? I'm not speaking too long. There's a very interesting contradiction in the Chinuch. He says, in one mitzvah, he says, what appears to be that you can never touch anyone else with your free will. And in another mitzvah, he contradicts that. That is fascinating. It's Rav Moshe Shapiro. When it comes to the mitzvah, it's Reish Mem and Reish Mem Aleph. The mitzvahs of revenge and bearing a grudge, right? You know the halachas, you're not allowed to take revenge against someone, which means do to them what they did to you. And you're not allowed to bear a grudge, which means not to do it, but remind them, right? You go to your neighbor and you say, please, can I borrow your lawnmower? And he says, no. Next week he comes over to you and says, can I borrow yours? And you say, no. That you're not allowed to do. That's called nekama. You're doing to him what he did to you. What's bearing a grudge? Can I borrow your lawnmower? He says, no. Next week he comes to you. You say, sure, I'm not like you. That's called netira, right? That's called bearing a grudge. You have to say nothing. There's a story about a man crawling through the desert dying of thirst. Another man rode past on a horse, looked at him, and he abandoned him to die. He miraculously survived, and some years later turned out to be the president of a big business corporation. And one day a man came in asking for a job, and he recognized the face of the man that left him to die in the desert. If he would have refused him the job, revenge. If he would have given the job and reminded him, netira, said nothing and gave him the job. That's what you're required to do as a Jew. Of course, if he's applying for a job to be a gentle, tender caretaker for frail little old ladies, maybe he's not the right guy. You know, that you could refuse. But because of your own personal animus, that you're not allowed to do. So now listen carefully. The chinuch says something amazing. When someone hurts you, listen carefully. When someone hurts you, you have a very strong urge to do to them what they did to you. But you know what's not appropriate? Because you should remind yourself that what happened to you came from Hashem. Oh, that's very interesting. You know why you shouldn't take revenge? Because you want to take revenge because he hurt you, but you're mistaken. You're making a bad mistake. The person hurt you, it came from Hashem. Ooh, this is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Listen to where he contradicts this. In the mitzvah of hazama, you know we have a very interesting law in the Torah which no legal system has, and that is if two witnesses contradict two other witnesses in a court, then the evidence is cancelled. But if two witnesses make a unique claim, they say that two other witnesses could not have been present at the time of the crime. You familiar with this? That's called hazama. In other words, these two witnesses testify that that person committed murder. Two other witnesses come in and they say, we don't know about the murder, but you couldn't have been there. You were with us in Tel Aviv on that day, right? And not at the site of the murder. What happened, we don't know. But you are lying. In that unique circumstance, the Torah has two unbelievable or remarkable consequences. One is we believe the second and not the first, which needs thought. Who says that they are trying to frame him? Maybe they're trying to frame them. That's a homework exercise you can think about. But that's the Torah says. You believe the second too. But here comes something even more weird. What do we do to the first two witnesses when proved that they're lying? We do to them what they tried to do to the victim. You familiar with this? If they want to make him pay money, they pay money. If they wanted him to be killed, they get killed. But here comes the weird thing. We only do it to them if they failed. In other words, if they testified about someone and got him killed, and then we find out they're liars, we do nothing to them. If they tried to get him killed and failed, then they get killed. Is this weird? So these two people testify that that person killed someone. That person's taken out to be executed. Before he dies, these two witnesses rush in and say, stop 1 second, it's a mistake. We call back the accused, and these people get killed. But if they testify about him and he gets killed, dead, and then these two arrive, no problem, these two are scot-free. Is that logical? Listen to what the chinuch says. He says, I'll give you a kitzas time, a partial understanding. Okay, it's a long subject, but listen to what he says. He says, you know why if these two people accuse someone of murder and he gets killed, you know why we do nothing to them? Because if it happened to him, he must have had it coming. What do you want from them? If they testify that someone did a murder and he gets killed, it came from Hashem, not from them. And listen to the extra words. And he says, and you know why? Because a Beis Din, or a Sanhedrin, always judges with the presence of Hashem among them. Elokim nitzav ba'ados kel. We say it every week in Tehillim. God sits together with a Beis Din, which means any time a Sanhedrin or a Beis Din judges, Hashem is in their presence. In fact, some Rishonim say the only reason humans can ever administer justice is because Hashem assures the result. Hashem says, never mind, you take the evidence and I'll make sure that it works out correctly. Right? That justice is done. And therefore, listen to what he says carefully. Here comes Rav Moshe Shapiro. Pay attention. Use your black belt mind here. The reason that if the person got what was coming to him must have been justified is because a Beis Din gave a ruling. And a Beis Din giving a ruling is always assured because Hashem sits among them. But that only applies to a Beis Din. That doesn't apply to an individual acting unilaterally in the street. If a person always gets what's coming to him, he doesn't have to invoke the pasuk that says Elokim Nitzov. If what the chinuch means is anytime anything ever happens to anyone, it's always justified, you don't have to give me the pasuk of Elokim Nitzov. Elokim Nitzov means that when the Beis Din rules and someone dies, you can rest assured that it's correct because Hashem is with the Beis Din. But the inference is that if it's not a Beis Din, it's somebody acting on his own in the street, all bets are off. That means you could do something to somebody he doesn't deserve. How do we resolve the conflict? Rav Moshe said the answer is that when the chinuch says that the reason you shouldn't take revenge against someone is because you had it coming means had you had more merit, you would have been protected. Hashem always involved in the decision. So when somebody harms you, you can have what's called taromus. You can have a complaint against them. But revenge is going too far. Because although they put you in danger and became the agent of your harm, Hashem definitely allowed it. You didn't have enough source. He's always involved. Okay, let's close the circle. when the Sanhedrin is making a judgment and the final judge speaks, of course he has to say the truth. This person walks out of there, Hashem's with us, he knows what he's doing. And therefore, if you're on a Beis Din and you disagree with the other two judges, argue your case. You disagree, vote. They outvote you, Hashem knows what he's doing. But when you're in a Beis Din with two liars, Hashem's not sitting in a false Beis Din like that, then get out of there. That's what he says. And therefore, Pesach Tshuva says, if it's part of a Sanhedrin, the Dayan has to speak, he speaks the truth. The result is against what he thinks should happen, Hashem's with a Beis Din. But you're sitting on a Beis Din with two other jokers who liars. Hashem's not with such a Beis Din. And therefore you feel that's the case, he says, don't vote. Get out of there. Anyway, this is a brief introduction to this wonderful subject that we're coming across this week. Can people harm you? Can people help you? Human free will is very, very real. Humans are more dangerous than non-human agencies. You need to take more protection. You need more merit to be protected against humans. And on the flip side, your free will is very real. When you do things that harm or help people, you become an agent. To be sure, Hashem's always involved. You can never go against what he wants or allows. But nevertheless, human agency is the reason the world was created. Any final questions before we... Thank you very much again for this opportunity and pray for you.